and welcome to the How Not to Screw Up Your Kids podcast, the bucket emptying episodes. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Han, psychologist and parenting expert, and today I want to talk about parent guilt, because this is something that we face all of the time. I'm kind of utterly convinced that almost as soon as our baby or child is sort of handed over to us, that it's like we get branded with this kind of like parent guilt that interferes in all aspects of what we do. It interferes in the decisions that we make. It interferes with our ability to kind of take ourselves off and do things that flourish for us. So how do we deal with that parent guilt? Well, parent guilt generally comes when there's a disconnect between what you are doing as a parent and what you believe you should be doing. So the first thing that we have to do when we're kind of caught into that parent guilt is just sort of take a bit of a step back and ask ourselves, what's that disconnect? What am I telling myself about what it means to be a parent? And what am I doing? So for example, we might get parent guilt because maybe we're working. Our work hours mean that we don't get to drop off our children at school, or we don't get to pick them up, or we don't get to go to various different events that they do, whether it's plays, whether it's, play dates or anything like that. So when we find that scenario playing out, what will happen is the disconnect between those two is between the kind of internal language that we've said to ourselves about what it means to be a good parent or the perfect parent, and then that disconnect between what we perceive we should be doing and what we are actually doing. So I think it's really important that we kind of take that step back and say, why am I feeling guilty? What is it particularly that I'm feeling guilty about? What is the language that I'm using? Where is the expectation? And where has it come from? So if that expectation is all to do with a narrative that you have, that you've created, that you keep telling yourself, then it's about having a bit of a conversation with yourself about how true is that? How real is that? How impactful is that truly to your child? Because actually, our children learn so much from what we model for them. And if work is something that is incredibly fulfilling for us, that we're passionate about, that we get joy from, that lights us up, that gives us, even if it's something that we're not enjoying from a career or feel that that's our life purpose, but it brings us an element of independence. It allows us to have that space between being a parent and also doing something else. Then we need to remember and we need to connect with that. So it's that, where is the disconnect? Where is the disconnect coming from? If the disconnect is coming a bit from you and the expectations that you've set, but also from what you are sort of receiving in terms of input, and if that input is maybe social platforms, and maybe you've been scrolling a little bit too much on your Instagram or any other feed that you're looking at, that is painting a picture of parenting and what it means to be the perfect parent, whether that, the perfect father, the perfect mother, then part of that reflective practice is being able to say to yourself, is this serving me right now? What can I do to help manage that input that is coming in that is making me feel the way that I'm feeling? And it may be that you make the choice that actually right now, this parent guilt is being fueled by what I'm seeing on social platforms. And therefore, for me right now, I'm going to take a bit of a detox. I'm going to come off social platforms for a week. Or it may well be that you choose to re-look at your feed, and there may be certain things that you're receiving within your feed that you then opt out of. So it's understanding where that disconnect, where that guilt is coming from. Is it an expectation that you've set yourself? How real is that? Is that appropriate? Having a bit of a conversation with yourself about that, reminding yourself that there is no such thing as perfect parenting. There is no such thing as being the model best good parent. If it's to do with input that you're getting, then it's looking at, particularly if that's coming from social platforms. If it's coming maybe from an expectation of your partner, your partner's family, your friends, then I do think you need to brace yourself for a difficult conversation. I don't mean brace yourself because you're going to have some sort of fisticuff, but I do think we shouldn't allow these sort of situations to fester and to boil up. And then, when we talk about, the whole point of these bucket emptying episodes is we're trying to relieve things and avoid our bucket overflowing, and then us responding in a way that we don't necessarily want to respond to. Keeping that inside because we think we just want to make things good and not upset anybody isn't helpful. And I'll tell you why it isn't helpful. It isn't helpful for you because you're holding on to a highly charged emotion in your body, which energetically is not helpful for you. It'll manifest itself in something else, tummy aches, difficulty sleeping, whatever it is, it will do that. And the other thing is that this notion of emotional contagion, you think you might have this under control and that your children are not noticing this, but that won't be the case. They'll be picking up on that disconnect between what you're saying and how you're responding emotionally and how you are. So if you're not, having those difficult conversations, is not just about getting things off your chest. It's about clearing the air and keeping those lines of communication. The other thing that I would therefore also say about parent guilt is that you also need to reflect back on, so we're trying to find out where is the guilt coming from? Where is that disconnect? Also, and I say this with love, it's looking at what are the things that we are doing because we feel guilty that is inconsistent and incongruent with the way that we want to parent. What are the things that we're doing that might be overcompensating because we feel guilty about not being present? We feel guilty that we're not always available to do things. We feel guilty for whatever that is. Maybe we feel guilty because we feel like we shout a lot. And so what happens is we overcompensate. We're not consistent. We're not congruent. We don't show up as the parent we want to be, because what then happens is we allow our children to do things that we wouldn't ordinarily do because we feel guilty, or we buy them things, or we overcompensate with love, time, presence. Children flourish with really clear communication, really clear boundaries, and from that compassionate aspect of parenting, which is about quite often saying that what they want to do is not congruent with how we want to raise them. So we have to say no. And what often happens with parenting guilt is that it creates this jarring, because we feel bad, because we feel we should be this rather than this. And the reality is that there is no such thing as a perfect parent. And what we then do is we then say yes to things, we ignore things, we allow things to happen, which we wouldn't ordinarily do if we didn't have that coupled parenting guilt. So it's quite a complex thing. I do think it's, we need to recognize that we're going to have guilt regardless. If you're a stay-at-home parent, you're going to feel guilty that you're not modeling enough of that career aspirations. If you're working a lot, you're then going to have parental guilt that you're not always present. If you've got something in the middle, there'll always be an aspect of parenting guilt. We always feel that we're not necessarily showing up as the best version of ourselves. It's just really being able to give ourselves that time to really understand, where's that disconnect coming from? Why am I saying that to myself? What do I now need to do? Do I need to have a difficult conversation with someone else? Do I need to take some action around the input that I'm receiving in terms of social platforms? Do I just need to have a conversation with myself to remind myself that I'm doing a great job and that actually I'm just beating myself up, and also being honest about what actions are we taking as a result of that parental guilt? So I hope that is a useful one. Hopefully this will be timed. This episode will come out around the time either that our children are on their school holidays, or after or just before, because it's that kind of reminder, because often, that can amplify our guilt. We always have the guilt, but sometimes it gets amplified at that particular stage. So if you have enjoyed this podcast episode, I would be so appreciative. I would love it if you can rate, review, and follow this podcast so that others can find us and we can spread the love. So until next time.